This will be a short screenshot video. It's the third video in the first 2 weeks of the crimes course, and it's posting 3. It deals with criminal cases in the federal court system. I'm going to scroll down here. I offer you a brief description of the federal court system. In this posting, I might note that in the civil practice course, when we get there, or you may be there this semester, we take a closer and more detailed look at the federal court system. But for now, what we could say is the federal court system handles cases where a person or an entity has been charged with violating the federal criminal law. In other words, Congress has passed a law and it makes certain conduct a federal criminal offense. Could be income tax evasion. Sometimes there's an overlap between state and federal law. So if someone were to rob a bank today, that would be a violation of the state law. It's robbery, but it also would be in violation of the federal law, and it would depend upon whether the state law enforcement authorities or the federal law enforcement authorities are going to handle the case. A lot of drug cases fall into that category. More recently, if I could come up with a topical example, when people broke into the U.S. Capitol, we've seen that there's been a lot of federal criminal charges based on their conduct. And I suspect as time goes by, some of the folks who participated in that event will be charged with sedition and conspiracy connected with sedition. In any event, if there's a federal criminal charge, it will be handled by one of the U.S. district courts. There's 94 federal judicial districts in the United States, and we happen to be in Western New York in the United States District Court for the Western District of New York. Federal criminal offenses could be thought of as falling into the category of a misdemeanor, or more serious ones are in the category of a felony. If it's a felony, there will be a grand jury first determining whether to charge the defendant, and if the charge is made, there will be an indictment issued. If it's a misdemeanor, there's no need for an indictment. In the U.S. District Court, one of those 4 dispositions or outcomes is reached: guilty by plea, guilty by verdict, not guilty, or dismissal of the charges. If there's going to be an appeal, and we know there will be no appeal if it's a not guilty verdict, the appeal is taken to the U.S. Court of Appeals. There's 12 regional circuits in the U.S. In Western New York, we are in the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, which is headquartered in New York City. If the party wishes to appeal after the U.S. Court of Appeals issues a decision, the last step is to the highest court in the U.S., the United States Supreme Court, but that appeal is effectively an appeal by permission. So one would have to convince the Supreme Court that it should take its time to consider the case before the appeal can actually be taken there. What I want to spend the rest of our time on is the possibility that a state criminal case also can end up in the federal court system. And I use the case of Miranda versus Arizona because most of us have seen one of those law enforcement shows on TV or in a movie where defendants or suspects, better said, are giving their Miranda warnings. And so what happens is, and actually some of us were around for part of it, in the 1960s and early 1970s, the Supreme Court interpreted the Federal Bill of Rights quite expansively and gave state criminal court defendants, emphasize state criminal court defendants, rights that had previously only been granted to federal criminal court defendants. That sets the stage for the 1966 decision in Miranda. By the way, when Miranda was announced, I can tell you because I was around and actually studying constitutional law a little bit, it was quite a uproar about the case. In any event, what happens in Miranda is a guy is charged with rape in the state courts of Arizona. Mr. Miranda, he was not a law professor. He's convicted. As his case was being processed, he claimed that a confession was used against him, and it was taken, the confession, in violation of his Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination and his Sixth Amendment right to counsel in the criminal case. The U.S. Supreme Court, after the Arizona courts had upheld the conviction, decides to consider the claim, and it could. There was jurisdiction there because, again, though it was a state criminal court conviction, it concerned a allegation that a federal right, a federal constitutional right, was violated. And then the court takes the case, the U.S. Supreme Court takes the case, and of course issues the decision in Miranda. So when we're looking at the federal court system, we can say, number one, it handles federal criminal charges like sedition, but it also could handle a state criminal court case after the state criminal court has had its say with the case. And a defendant now asks the Supreme Court, and this is technically called a petition for a writ of certiorari, to consider the case. And Miranda stands as a good example of that. I think that's all we need to say for this screenshot video.